Welcome to part 5. So far we've seen both a breadth and a depth of red flags from Mao. In the last part we also found out that he may well have had both ingredients required to become a narcissist. A lack of control environment growing up, as well as the opportunity for a genetic predisposition towards narcissism being passed down to him from his father and possibly his mother. Let's continue with the 5th clip.
All right.
No, of course. Why does that not surprise me?
Is that not what you read?
Mao, walking into the therapist Orna's office and sitting straight down on her chair, could be an honest mistake, but I think that's fairly unlikely. We know that this must be at least the 5th therapy session, so Mao will know by now that Annie and he are supposed to sit on the couch together, rather than sitting on the single chair that's facing it. Even if done in a slightly humorous way, it's likely that this is an assertion of control over Orna, essentially a power play, and a way of provoking a reaction from her. It could also show a lack of boundaries.
You know, in thinking about the time we spent together so far, I have to say I'm still not clear on what would be something you really want to work on.
I think that makes total sense because we're not on the same page. Mm-hmm. So I know what I want.
Mm-hmm. What was that?
It's about that communication piece, that even though you're super, super supportive and the world's best husband, sometimes you're also dismissive, and where that leaves me when you're being dismissive. What do you want?
We've heard some pretty damning things about the way that Mao treats Annie so far, and we've seen his dismissiveness and invalidation towards her on multiple occasions. Despite this, when Annie talks, it's clear that she still holds him in high esteem. She calls him super supportive and the world's best husband, and it doesn't sound to me as if there's any sarcasm or mockery in there. It's important to note that narcissists aren't always terrible to their partners. Very few people would stay with somebody who was constantly abusing them. Instead, after the initial golden period at the start of a relationship, a narcissist's partner enters sustained devaluation, which is where they will alternate between being devalued and being idealized in what can feel like a roller coaster of ups and downs. So a narcissist will treat their partner well some of the time, and in addition they can provide support to their partner, for example, giving them money, cleaning the house, picking up the children from school, etc. The difference is that these acts aren't born out of a genuine emotional empathy for their partner, but rather because the narcissist is getting something else from doing them. Often this will be because acts are a good way to assert control over their partner and draw a positive emotional reaction from them, an emotional reaction being what fuels a narcissist. These acts also make the narcissist seem like a good person to others. And there are also other reasons why narcissists carry out these acts. So it's very possible that if Mao is a narcissist, he would appear to be supportive and the world's best husband in some areas, or at certain points in time, while devaluing Annie at other times. Notice how Annie says that sometimes Mao is dismissive. She steers clear of highly inflammatory language such as saying he is dismissive, or he's always dismissive. This is despite the high level of dismissiveness we've witnessed from Mao towards her so far. Once again, Annie isn't giving us any red flags, and I reiterate that it's extremely unlikely that she's a narcissist at this point.
What do you want?
I want you to be happy.
This could either be a genuine display of emotional empathy from Mao towards Annie, or the false empathy of a narcissist thinking they care. We can't know which one it is from this statement alone. We have to look at it in the context of Mao's wider behaviour and see what he does to achieve this supposed goal. If he genuinely has empathy for Annie and wants her to be happy, then presumably we'll see him listening to what she's saying, that she feels like he dismisses her, and acting accordingly.
What do you want?
I want you to be happy.
No, what do you want out of therapy?
Babe, you have such riches of opportunity, and you use them to criticize the environment that provided those riches for you.
Yet again, Mao dismisses Annie's concerns. His response is manipulative, basically saying, "Look at everything I provide for you. You shouldn't be criticizing my behavior." It's an attempt to guilt Annie by triangulating her with the things that he supposedly provides for her. And it's the third time we've seen or heard about this type of manipulation from Mao. So it seems to be a recurring method that he uses to control Annie and to shut her up whenever she complains about the way he's treating her. He holds everything he does for her over her head. Notice the implied grandiosity and haughtiness from Mao, both here and in the previous instances where we've seen this behaviour. Rather than viewing their 23-year marriage as a joint partnership to which they both contribute and are both equal, it seems as if he views himself as this amazing, supportive, providing husband, and therefore he should have carte blanche to act in essentially any way he chooses without repercussion. It shows entitlement, a lack of accountability, and a lack of empathy.
Like your statement that even though you're amazing, sometimes you're dismissive. How is that a problem? Like, is the goal to never be dismissive? Like 0%?
Mao can't seem to comprehend that being dismissive towards his partner is an issue. He's almost incredulous when asking, is the goal never to be dismissive? Like 0%? It's quite startling that he can't see that this would be a goal that most couples would strive towards. This is yet another piece of evidence pointing towards Mao being a lesser narcissist. That is, a narcissist that not only doesn't have emotional empathy, but also doesn't have a good ability to intellectually think things through from someone else's point of view, so-called cognitive empathy. He just has no concern or desire to be seen as a kind, caring person in the way that a mid-range narcissist typically would.
Annie has been threatening in one way or another to leave for a while. Mm-hmm. It's unlikely that I'm going to really dramatically change. So, you just have to, make a decision.
Again, this epitomizes the mindset of a lesser narcissist. I am what I am, and other people just have to deal with it or leave. I'm not going to change. This contradicts his earlier statement of saying he just wants Annie to be happy. If he truly just wanted her to be happy, he would listen to what she's telling him, take her feelings into account, and be willing to make some effort on his part. Not doing so means that his earlier statement was a lie. He doesn't just want Annie to be happy. He wants Annie to be happy to put up with the way he treats her.
But you're saying that the problem resides in Annie. If Annie just was okay with that, you'd be good.
Well, yes, I think, yeah, sort of, yeah.
I have to say that's unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Blame shifting and rejection of accountability. The problem isn't Mao's behaviour, but rather Annie complaining about Mao's behaviour. Mao is simply not able to see anything wrong with the way he behaves. As I've said before, a mid-range narcissist would generally at least go through the pretense of saying they needed to change some things.
If you had to tell the story of why feeling dismissed, why is that? I mean, of course it's difficult for everyone, but your story, what is it for you?
Well,
in a way that hopefully Mao will care about.
This is an attempt by Orna to get Mao to understand why being dismissed is painful for Annie, and to get him to empathise with her. Unfortunately, it's not a strategy that will ultimately work with a narcissist, because they don't have emotional empathy.
I've had my share of sexual trauma.
Can you say more?
I grew up in New York City. I grew up, commuting. I grew up relatively independent, much more independent probably than kids are allowed to be now. Mm-hmm. And I felt very physically vulnerable. And I was reminded of that physical vulnerability and sexual physical vulnerability all the time, from 4th grade on.
What happened at 4th grade?
I was touched inappropriately multiple times. I mean, I feel like me and my girlfriend, we were flashed all the time.
So this like constant sexual intimidation.
Constant. And then in high school, there was definitely multiple incidences of coercion. And then I was date raped. Yeah, like right before we met. So like, you know, it's not the most extreme, but it was constant.
Constant and awful. I just want to check with you, Mal. How do you feel about what Annie's described in terms of her history of like sexual intimidation and...
I wasn't there to protect you.
This technique can sometimes trigger progress in couples therapy. It can open someone's eyes as to why their partner is so sensitive to a particular issue. Hearing about the traumatic sexual experiences Annie has had to deal with from the age of around 9, throughout high school, and then well into her adulthood, should be starting to turn light bulbs on in Mal's mind. When he's asked how he feels about Annie's history of sexual intimidation, his answer is, "I wasn't there to protect you." On the face of it, this doesn't seem to be the warm and empathetic response that someone would typically hope for from their partner in a situation like this. There's no overt sign of empathy or a desire to comfort Annie after hearing what she's been through. He instead turns the situation round to be about him. He wasn't there to protect her. Could this be a touch of grandiosity, viewing himself as the saviour that would have prevented all of this? Of course, as I keep saying, as with any statement, we cannot definitively say that Mal's response proves a lack of empathy. It's possible, although less likely, that a non-narcissist could behave in this way too. People express empathy in radically different ways, and there are plenty of people who have difficulty openly expressing it. And some empathetic people are more action-oriented in their displays of empathy, and could therefore feel more of a desire to do something and fix the problem on hearing about a loved one being hurt.
I wasn't there to protect you.
I guess this is kind of one line of reasoning why you would carry a particular sensitivity to being dismissed or stepped over or disregarded. And your immediate response was, "I feel protective."
Orna certainly views Mal's response as positive, saying it shows that Mal feels protective of Annie. We have to bear in mind that for a couples therapist, maintaining hope is vitally important. It's a difficult job with frequent setbacks, and therapists need to keep the belief that no matter how bad things seem, if there are two people sitting in front of them, there is always hope that things can be resolved. And it's their job and responsibility to help clients achieve this, if that's what they want. So it makes sense that Orna would run with this as an example of empathy from Mal towards Annie. By the way, I find that couples therapists are often very empathetic people who have a fundamental belief that there's an underlying goodness in almost everyone, and that it can be brought out with the right help. They almost have to have this belief, or they simply wouldn't be able to do their job. If they were to accept that a good portion of their clients consisted of couples that are a narcissist and a victim, well, that makes their whole role in trying to help those couples stay together somewhat morally dubious.
And your immediate response was, "I feel protective." How do we go from that to when Annie experiences even like something similar to that with you, you lose empathy?
To begin with, she's never had an experience with me that's similar to those experiences.
Obviously.
Right.
That's not true.
Orna's trying to break through to Mal, to get him to empathize and care that his actions are hurting Annie. But I don't think it's necessarily being done in a very tactful way, because it does sound as if she's accusing Mal of treating Annie in a similar way to how she was treated in the past, and showing no empathy. Now this may well be true, as Annie insists here, and as we saw in part 2, where Mal nonchalantly said that his so-called encouraging of Annie sexually was easily interpreted as pressure, but also maybe even more than pressure. But people don't react well to this kind of direct criticism, especially narcissists. And this direct strategy isn't typically a good way of convincing somebody to do something. Then again, nothing's going to work with a narcissist at the end of the day, so there's a high chance that this is all just academic anyway. By the way, please don't get the impression that I think Orna's doing a bad job overall. She's a great therapist, but even great therapists won't do everything perfectly. They're trying to do the best they can in the heat of the moment, often in some quite intense situations. And it can be especially tricky when dealing with a difficult person like Mao, because undoubtedly, despite her best efforts, she will be feeling some level of animosity and frustration towards him.
She's never had an experience with me that's similar to those experiences.
Obviously.
Right. They're
That's not true.
Oh,
It is both true and untrue.
Word salad.
that's okay. Well, you should say.
He, in a beautiful way, wanted me to have a sexual confidence that he thought I deserved. And sometimes that looked in a way that I felt like was just perpetuating this like objectification and vulnerability, because he didn't want me just to wear like postage stamp size skirts at home. He wanted me to wear postage stamp size skirts to the grocery store or out
Farmer's
for
market.
dinner. The farmer's market, right. And my grandmother's house. I mean,
Mao getting Annie to dress up in an extremely short skirt to places where that isn't typically done, such as the grocery store, a farmer's market, or her grandmother's house, could very well be a narcissist carrying out a provocative act to draw a reaction from other people. If Mao was a narcissist, Annie would essentially be seen as an extension of him, because subconsciously she's objectified as his possession. So people reacting to the way that she was dressed would provide him with fuel, because in a way it's a reflection on him, and also the way that he dressed her. Even if he didn't personally witness the reaction from others, just the thought of their reaction would provide him with what's known as thought fuel. And Annie's right that it is an objectification of her, which is exactly what a narcissist does. Because of their lack of emotional empathy, they treat other people as objects. In fact, it's a key element of the narcissistic dynamic. The fact that Annie has had such a long history of unwanted sexual objectification and vulnerability, and yet Mao is happy to continue this by making her wear clothes she's uncomfortable with in public, shows his lack of emotional empathy for her, his lack of boundaries, and his lack of accountability in his role as a partner that should have his wife's best interests at heart. It's actually a red flag for another reason as well. Narcissists often control their partner's clothing in one way or another. It doesn't always have to be dressing them up provocatively. For example, it could be quite the opposite, making them dress overly modestly. Controlling their partner's clothing is almost irresistible for a narcissist, because it's such an overt act of control over their partner's very autonomy. Finally, notice how Annie is really giving Mao the benefit of the doubt here and ascribing positive motives to his actions, saying that it was him wanting her to have the sexual confidence that he thought she deserved, in a beautiful way. Once again, this stands out to me as sounding like the dynamic between a narcissist and victim, where the victim is enthralled to the narcissist and makes excuses or justifications for what is essentially poor behavior from the narcissist. Behavior that people on the outside of the relationship can easily see for what it is, a red flag.
But are you saying that you felt a certain kind of pressure?
yes, a ton of pressure
A ton of
throughout our
pressure
marriage that I have,
That was supposedly on your behalf?
supposedly and supposed to be on my behalf.
But actually your experience of it was
the
that
opposite.
it's... Okay.
Lack of boundaries, lack of emotional empathy, manipulative and controlling behavior through applying pressure. This is the point at which Mao should be putting two and two together and realizing that his actions are hurting Annie. Instead, he's looking bored, stretching and distractedly looking around the room. It's likely that this is an assertion of control through withdrawal. Often a narcissist will actually get up and flounce out of a situation that's challenging their control, perhaps saying something like, "I can't listen to this crap anymore." In their subconscious mind, that is them regaining control of the situation. But in some situations where it's not possible to physically withdraw, a narcissist can still assert control through withdrawal. This is essentially where they just check out mentally, thinking something along the lines of, "I'm not listening to this complete crap that's being spouted," and thinking dark thoughts about the person talking. You'll often see this happen during the reunion or tell-all episode at the end of a series of reality TV, where a narcissist is forced to sit and listen to somebody they dislike talking. Here's an example. It's quite interesting to watch because a narcissist will often look away and a blank look comes over their face as they basically try to shut the other person out of their mind. Remember that control to a narcissist is not necessarily what you or I would define control as. To me, walking away from somebody or shutting them out of my mind wouldn't be controlling them. But to a narcissist, it's as if when you're not there, you don't exist. In their mind, they have still gained control of the situation. It's a strange, almost childlike view of reality, but there we are.
A ton of pressure throughout our marriage that I have
supposedly on your behalf,
supposedly and supposed to be on my behalf,
but actually your experience of it was
the
that
opposite.
Okay.
So that's been insulting.
It's all internal. There's
Meaning
it's all on me.
that's not what I mean. I mean, you're describing your feelings.
Mal has just heard how his actions have hurt Annie, especially in light of the previous trauma she's experienced. And his reaction is to dismiss and invalidate her for describing her feelings. This shows a lack of emotional empathy and a hypersensitivity to a threat to control. But it actually goes further than that. Criticizing somebody for discussing their feelings during couples therapy shows a lack of cognitive empathy as well. Mal has an inability to understand that his partner's feelings should be important to him, and that discussing feelings is what people are supposed to do during couples therapy. So it's yet another piece of evidence pointing us in the direction of Mal being a lesser narcissist. And of course, he's also showing haughtiness in both the way he's talking to Annie and in his demeanor.
I mean, you're describing your feelings.
Whatever.
Sugar, I'm not disagreeing with you.
I have a picture. I have a picture. We
wait,
were
I didn't hear.
my...
Are you disagreeing?
Yes. Yes, he is. He's saying that it's all in my head.
That's not what I'm saying.
I'm not.
Annie seems to think that Mal is gaslighting her, saying, "He's saying that it's all in my head," and insisting that she has pictures to prove what she was saying. Now, it doesn't seem to me that Mal is saying that the events Annie described didn't happen, but it's interesting that she would jump straight to that conclusion. Could it be that she's been subjected to gaslighting by Mal in the past, which is why she explodes with such indignance and insistence that what she's saying is true? Mal seems to be finding how upset and indignant Annie is funny, and is laughing. Is this a lack of emotional empathy?
Are you disagreeing?
Yes. Yes, he is. He's saying that it's all in my head.
That's not what I'm saying.
I'm not sure.
That's
I'm not
not
sure.
what I'm saying, love.
I'm not sure.
Okay, what are you saying?
I'm saying there's nothing, right? I'm listening to you describe something, right? That's what I'm doing. I mean, it's internal in the sense that the wellspring of information is coming out of you. There's not an external basis for me to have an opinion. I'm just listening to you describe your experience. That's it.
Okay.
So Mal isn't gaslighting Annie. Instead, he's dismissing her experience and feelings as just internal, and so not something he has an opinion on. The problem is that a large part of couples therapy involves helping participants understand how their actions make their partner feel, and why their partner feels that way. It's not about telling one person that their actions are wrong per se, but rather trying to get them to understand why their actions are being interpreted in a particular way, often based on their partner's upbringing and past experiences. And a light bulb moment would be them realizing, wow, of course, I didn't mean for my actions to come across that way, but I can understand why my partner viewed it that way. I can try to alter my behavior to avoid that happening again in the future. That's the situation that we should have here. Annie has opened up and described how she's had sexual trauma in the past, and that as a result, some of Mal's actions throughout their marriage have felt like pressure to her, although she acknowledges, giving him the benefit of the doubt, that it was intended in a beautiful way. Mal's response is to look bored, and then to completely dismiss and invalidate Annie's feelings. Clearly, therapy cannot work here, because Mal gives zero weighting to Annie's feelings. This seems like a typical knee-jerk reaction of a narcissist. Instead of truly listening and trying to understand the other person, their subconscious self-defense mechanism that is the narcissism kicks in to protect them from a challenge to their control. The process is essentially, this is a criticism of me, this person is trying to pin me with accountability and force me to change my behaviour. I must therefore reject this threat to my control.
If we got way off the topic of how he feels when I feel upset, I think that this actually brings us right back there. Because we're talking about like how you make me feel and you go, that's in your head. Or, nah, you can't feel that way because I'm such a good husband.
I think I would like to start from a place where we give Mao a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt.
Okay.
I'm not sure I heard it that way, and I'd like to believe, I mean, I've seen you react empathically, and I'd like to believe that you've got that in you.
Annie complains that Mal dismisses her feelings, either by saying it's in her head, or by saying that she can't feel that way because he's such a great husband. This seems highly likely to be true, given that we've already seen Mal do both of these things. So it's interesting that Orna seems to take Mal's side here, saying she'd like to start from a place where we give Mal a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt, how she's seen him react empathetically, and how she'd like to believe that he has that in him. This might seem unfair. Surely it's obvious that Annie is the wronged party here. But we have to remember that the therapist's role is not to be judge and jury and to side with one party while attacking the other. Orna's role is to help Annie and Mal manage their conflicts, and the only hope for doing this ultimately lies in Mal understanding that what he's doing is hurting Annie, and recognizing that he needs to change. The road to this is absolutely not through attacking or chastising him, which will trigger defensiveness and probably him leaving therapy. Instead, Orna is appealing to Mal's empathy. In a way, she's trying to manipulate him by being nice to him, in the same way you might try to talk somebody down if they were causing a scene in public. Now I know you're a good person and you don't want to hurt anybody, just put the fork down and we'll forget this ever happened.
I mean, I've seen you react empathically, and I'd like to believe that you've got that in you. So
yeah, I'm not going to help you with that. I don't need to earn anything there. I have it. If you can't see it, like, fuck you. And like, if you're not being magnanimous.
Mal takes offence, picking up on the implication from Orna that his behaviour shows a lack of empathy. His response is essentially, I'm empathetic and if you can't see that, fuck you. It's that sort of haughty, dismissive attitude that we've come to expect from Mal whenever he perceives there to be a challenge. It always seems to go down the same sort of path. I'm right, you're wrong. I don't need to justify myself or change. I'm already great. You're the problem. And of course, this hair-trigger reaction that we keep seeing is likely to be the response of a narcissist nullifying a threat to his control and reasserting control over others. The manipulations Mal uses to do this are, as usual, fairly in-your-face, direct and dismissive. But this time he's actually getting quite overtly aggressive, swearing at Orna, who's just calmly trying to do her job. This fury, which appears more often in lesser narcissists, is another tool that narcissists use to get other people to back down and return to being under their control. I think it's safe to say that Orna's attempted manipulation to coax a bit of empathy out of Mal has failed. Some people say it's easy to manipulate a narcissist into doing what you want. Other people say it's impossible. The truth is somewhere in between. It's absolutely possible to manipulate a narcissist sometimes, until they work out what you're doing. And remember that a narcissist is hypersensitive to the issue of control and plagued with paranoia, so there's a good chance that they will cotton onto you, and quickly. And when they do, their narcissism needs to reject your attempt to control them.
You're not being magnanimous. Like,
I'm not being magnanimous.
I know
I'm
you're
trying
not,
to
and I'm
stay true
telling
to
you
the
you're
truth.
not. Describe anything you want. but don't ascribe motivations to me. That's just unfair to me.
Okay, I won't.
I don't think it's in your head. You didn't make it up, babe. You're telling a story about something. I'm listening to you.
Okay.
That I can say a word, and you could take that word and imagine it. I've brewed some evil concoction. Like, fuck you. Like, stop. That's the problem.
Once again, Mao is saying that the real problem is Annie's interpretation of the things he says. This is denial, blame shifting, and a rejection of accountability. Remember that Mao will genuinely believe he's in the right here, which is why he's exploding with righteous indignation at the offense he's taking. It's almost certain that this is his narcissistic perspective, giving him an alternative view of reality, one where he's the victim in all this. As he says, "That's just unfair to me."
And you're right. This does exemplify it, but not in the way you imagine, in the way that I imagine. You keep telling the narrative as if I can't meet you where you're at. You're not meeting me where I'm at. All the time, recognizing the distance between us is the distance that I'm not moving. It's the distance between us. If you want to close that distance, start fucking walking toward me. Stop telling me you're over there and I need to just, get it because you've had bad experiences? Okay, me too.
Mao dismisses the idea that he should show understanding towards Annie because of the sexual trauma she experienced in the past. He says, "Stop telling me you're over there and I need to just get it. Because you've had bad experiences? Alright, me too." This is manipulative because he's using his poor upbringing essentially to one-up her and invalidate her complaints about his behaviour. It's a way to control her and shut her up. It's called triangulation with past events. And you may notice that this is not the first time that Mao has used this manipulation to control Annie. We've also seen him hold the supportive things he's done for her in the past over her head in order to control her. This manipulation shows the lack of empathy he has for her. He feels that he shouldn't have to show any understanding or leeway for sensitivities she may have developed from being regularly flashed and touched sexually as a child and being raped, because bad things have happened to him too. But the fact is that Annie does show understanding for Mao's poor upbringing. We saw in part 4 how engaged and empathetic she is towards what he has gone through, and how she views and rationalizes his behavior in light of how he was raised. But it's a one-way street. None of that understanding or empathy is returned to Annie. And once again, there's absolutely no give and take with Mao. No smidgen of a concession from him. For example, saying he'll try to tone his language down a bit. His attitude is, once again, "I'm not budging an inch." Or as he puts it, "If you want to close that distance, start fucking walking towards me." Mao is currently 1 minute and 10 seconds into this rant.
Stop telling me you're over there and I need to just, get it because you've had bad experiences? Okay, me too. So I'm happy to patiently sit here and listen to everything. And I'm empathetic. I'm empathetic all the fucking time. That's not a problem. You don't have a problem of lack of empathy in your husband. That's not what you have.
This shows a level of delusion from Mao. I've been hard pushed to see any significant display of empathy from him so far, and many times where he's shown a distinct lack of empathy. He's about 1 minute and 25 seconds into his rant at this point. Orna has tried to interject, but he cut her off. This ranting behaviour is likely to be a result of the ignited fury which flares up in a narcissist to enable them to put down a challenge to their control. If you already have a solid foundational grip on narcissism and want to understand this topic in more detail, I would recommend reading Fury by H.G. Tudor.
You feel like you're not getting something, you're getting it, and you feel like you're not getting it. But I can only give you it, right? If you don't accept it, it isn't something else. There's not something else, there's not a magic ingredient missing. The grass is not greener.
Again, Mao completely denies that he's doing anything wrong, saying that Annie feels like she's not getting something, but he's actually giving it to her and she isn't accepting it. As we've seen before, this is blame shifting and a rejection of accountability. He tells her there's no magic ingredient missing and the grass is not greener. I would assume this means that if she leaves him, she won't be treated any better by somebody else. This would be more triangulation, to manipulate her into staying and stopping complaining.
I can't do it while tap dancing. And I bent myself into a pretzel to try to figure out whatever it is that you need and then be called all sorts of fucking names in the therapist's office because I protected you.
We get a wonderful glimpse here into what I believe is Mao's narcissistic perspective. It's a great example of the principle that no matter how obvious it is that the narcissist is at fault, and how ridiculously one-sided the situation is, they are always capable of creating an alternate reality where they are the victim and their partner is the abuser. Based on the things that Mao has said here and previously, we can understand what his alternate view of reality is. He's the long-suffering husband, already giving Annie everything she could ever want, being supportive and bringing her riches of opportunity, and yet she throws this back in his face and still criticizes him. So now he's trying his best, bending himself into a pretzel to figure out what more she wants, and in return she attacks him during therapy, while he's there trying to protect her, and he can't possibly do any more than he's already doing. He can't do it while tap dancing. This alternate perspective on reality is the reason that Annie and Mao's problems are never going to be resolved. Anyone from outside the relationship would be able to see the real problem within a few minutes, but Mao can't. He hasn't in 25 years, and he never will. His narcissism prevents him from ever seeing the reality of the situation, that he's the problem. In order to maintain control, he has to reject accountability for any problems in the relationship. And if that means creating an alternate reality in his mind where he's the victim, then so be it. It's so tantalizing for the actual victim, because they think, I just have to make him see the truth about his behavior, then it will be so easy to fix everything. Surely I can make him see. I just need to find the right words, or the right analogy, or we need to attend therapy together, or I need to write him a letter, etc. It will not work. The narcissist will not see. They will either pretend to understand if they're a mid-range narcissist in order to manipulate you into shutting up, but then go straight back to their old ways and continue to abuse you. Or, if they're a lesser narcissist like Mao, they'll just deny there are any problems from their end forever. It's pointless. Once you recognize you're with a narcissist, the only solution is ending the relationship. Apart from the narcissistic perspective, the other red flags from Mao here are his victim mentality, his false martyrdom, his pity plays, and his attempts to guilt Annie once again.
And I bent myself into a pretzel to try to figure out whatever it is that you need and then be called all sorts of fucking names in the therapist's office because I protected you. That's it. Okay?
Yes.
All right.
This is just a very straightforward, direct assertion of control over Annie at the end of Mao's rant. Almost an order. That's it. Okay? Alright. Essentially, he's gone on an expletive-filled rant for 2 minutes, and now that's it. That's the end of the conversation. It's shut down with no right of reply or room for discussion. His word is final. It's interesting that Annie was looking earnestly at Mao during his rant and nodding. Then when he says okay at the end, she just meekly says yes. His ignited fury flared up and allowed him to shut down the challenge to his control successfully.
I just want to check your what angered you the most is the misread of you that Annie had right now?
It doesn't anger me the most. It's just the most disappointing. Like, I really still...
This is the second time we've heard Mao say he's disappointed with something Annie has done. It strikes me as a slightly strange way to describe how your partner has made you feel, because disappointment is often used in areas where there's a bit of a power imbalance. If you were to hear someone saying, "I'm very disappointed in you," you would typically expect it to be in a situation such as a teacher reprimanding a student, or a parent telling off their child. Mao saying it to Annie may be showing a level of underlying haughtiness, where he feels as if he's in a position to judge Annie as either living up to his expectations or disappointing him.
And if you feel that way, babe, I love you. You should leave. You should not live your life in this level of consternation. And if I'm the cause of it, you shouldn't be near me. If there's something there, as horrible as it will be for me, you can't live your life this disabled.
This is a manipulation known as threatened loss. Mal dresses his statements up in a way that sounds as if he's trying to be nice to Annie, for example saying she shouldn't live her life in this level of consternation, and he shows a degree of false martyrdom. As horrible as it will be for me, you can't live your life this disabled. But essentially what he's actually telling her is that he's not going to change, and her choice is either to accept how he treats her or to leave and lose him. Once again, it's his way or the highway. Sense of entitlement, lack of accountability towards his relationship, and lack of empathy. So that's the end of the 5th clip. It was fascinating to see it evolve from Annie talking about her sexual trauma to ending with Mal completely steamrolling her with a furious 2-minute rant. One of the great things about this series is that we get to hear Orna's thoughts on the sessions as well. Here's what she's currently thinking about Annie and Mal.
They told me already that they have not lasted more than 3 sessions with any couples therapist.
So this isn't the first time they've tried couples therapy. Presumably Annie has been trying to break through to Mal using therapy for some time, and he's been rejecting this. Quitting couples therapy once could be due to an incompatibility between the therapist and the couple. That happens. But to do this multiple times? I suspect that this will be down to Mal, and if that's the case, this would demonstrate his repeated lack of accountability in not being willing to see things through and to continue to try to fix their relationship.
I can't do all of the work that I could do because there's always the threat of them jumping ship. I have to maintain a connection with him on his terms. Otherwise I lose them as a couple. Sometimes it feels like, in a way, I have to sacrifice Annie to stay tuned in a very particular way to his way of speaking, because he's so sensitive to any diversion from the way he sees the world. Right. He experiences it as such an assault.
Right.
I'm not sure if I'm indulging him. Could I confront more? Could he tolerate it? Or would that blow up the treatment? Very tightrope I'm walking on there.
Yeah.
This shows the dilemma that Orna's facing. From her perspective, her only hope for saving Annie is to continue to engage with Mal on his terms. Let's summarize. We've seen strong, repeated, and varied indicators for narcissism in every single category from Mal. At this point, it's undeniable. He is a narcissist, and Annie is his empathic victim. I feel like I've already gone through Mal's red flags ad nauseum, so perhaps it would be interesting to point out the ways that we know of that Mal abuses his victim, Annie. Bear in mind that the vast majority of abuse happens behind closed doors, so what we've heard will just be the small tip of the iceberg. He dismisses her concerns. He invalidates her feelings. He doesn't value her opinion. He refuses to change things that she says are hurting her. He pressures her sexually. He demands sex 3 times a day, and if she doesn't go along with this, life is bad. In other words, he devalues her. He sleeps with other women. He controls her clothing. He makes her wear things that she's uncomfortable with and which play into the past traumas she's gone through. He swears at her. He rants at her. He blames his behavior on her misinterpreting the things he says. He holds the things he's done for her in the past over her head to control her and stop her from complaining. He issues ultimatums, essentially telling her to accept his behavior or to leave. He throws the nice things she tries to do for him back in her face, such as the birthday she planned for him. He regularly ruins birthdays, which is devaluing behavior towards her. he refuses to admit that he's ever wrong. He expects her to be a mind reader, for example, saying he wants her to know that he wants a glass of water before he asks for it, and it's there waiting. Then he devalues her when she can't achieve this. He has sky-high expectations from her, supposedly due to being Mr. Amazing. He has subjected her to absent silent treatment, flying to another continent when her birthday plans for him didn't meet his expectations. He says mean things to her. He belittles her. He plays the victim, and he guilts her. Meanwhile, Annie tries her best to understand Mal's behavior. She tries to justify it based on his poor childhood, and she makes excuses for him. For example, saying that he was only pressuring her sexually because he just wanted to love her up all the time. He was making her wear clothes she was uncomfortable with because, in a beautiful way, he wanted her to have the sexual confidence he felt she deserved. And his treatment of her on his birthday happened because she wasn't listening to him. This is a typical dynamic between a narcissist and their victim. Thank you for watching. Please feel free to like, comment and subscribe.